And I just think books are just almost always better,
Yeah.
except for current events. You need that online, of course.
Well, and I think,
Yeah.
just having the books, there's a sort of absorption consciously that or subconsciously that happens whether you read the
Yeah.
book or not. Sometimes there's some thought that our astral bodies go out and read books while we're dreaming. That's something we talked about on a recent episode.
Wow. That's odd, man. That's awesome. Please get to work, Astro Body, and read everything back there. I don't know. I mean, that makes some sense to me, actually. I did a little bit of astral travel work. I have a really good book on it called Astral Dynamics. And it's that blue book right there, that
Okay.
rather tall blue book next to the brown ones. It's really good for teaching about astral projection and astral travel. The thing is that people need to understand, and he doesn't emphasize this nearly enough in that book, but it is not risk-free to astral travel. Dreams are. You can be in so there's a crossover space between the astral realms and the just average dream space. There's a shared dream space. And that space seems to be totally safe, other than maybe it can mess with your mind a bit. But astral space is not. And people should really be aware of that, actually.
Yeah.
Just there's so much occult information that's out there now that I cringe sometimes thinking about how much, especially like dark magic stuff there is out there. So readily accessible. And people who don't know what they're doing are opening portals left, right, and center to the lower astral. And it's like, God, it's part of the reason I enjoy living rurally.
Yeah, no doubt. And I did just have a conversation with a friend, Joe Roop, who has his own podcast. He's done a lot with astral travel, and that's something we discussed, the dangers of it. And, he talked about people who have not come back from these astral trips. And, the sad and scary thing about that is, well, we don't know what happened to them because they're not here to tell us, and all we can do is base off, maybe circumstantial evidence that they were astral traveling. But there were a few cases where people were found, in maybe a yogic position and they had passed away, right? And yeah, who knows what happened to them beyond. But we are recording, thankfully, our supporters only. But let's get started. I didn't want to miss that. That was great. I'm glad we started with that.
Oh, that little like astral travel thing got in there. Cool.
Yeah.
Just to tie that off, then the greater risk isn't so much death, although that can happen. The greater risk is astral psychosis. People can become psychotic from doing, especially a lot of work in the astral space, especially out of their body. They can end up being kind of like stuck partially outside of their body, can have degradation of the energy fields, and that tends to manifest as mental health issues, in particular like delusions, because you're vibrating at a frequency that makes it very likely that you're going to interact with lower astral beings. So there's all manner of parasites and trickster spirits. Those are far more common than the really hardcore, like named demons, right? Like that. People generally don't just randomly run into those unless they've worked with those demons. That's why I'm just like, I cannot recommend highly enough to stay away from darker magic. It's very addictive. It's very dangerous. And they have a better PR team than Team Angelic Magic. We're also here at the tail end of the Kali Yuga, and so we're dealing more with the occult knowledge. Of the demonic side is far more readily available. And that's part of the reason that leads people to believe that all occult and esoteric knowledge is automatically of the devil, because the vast bulk of what is out there is from various shades of gray to pitch black magic.
Right.
There's not a lot of stuff on like angelic magic or healing magic. It exists, but it's far less than the demonic side. I would say probably 100 to 1.
Right.
Like if you can look up about any demon, no matter how low, and no matter how powerful, like the Qliphothic demons in particular, the Tree of Death, like you can look up a million different ways to summon them, and a lot of them would work. You probably don't actually want it to work because these beings are hyper intelligent and basically immortal, so they can play the long game, and they're smarter than you. I mean, they're smarter than everyone. I mean, I include myself in the statement as well. I mean, by you, I mean humans. They are smarter than us, and they're basically immortal, And so when you are basically immortal and much more intelligent, and you just have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, whatever it is, years of experience, like it's quite easy to dupe people. People always think they're in charge. And the more you think you're in charge, probably the less in charge you are, actually. Yeah. If I just really recommend people stay away from it, because PACs in particular are devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, I do want to get into all of that. I think there's plenty of room for that. But since we just started, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. I'm here with returning guest Ian Ferguson, who has the YouTube channel White Lotus of Light, as well as a website where you can get in touch with him by the same name, White Lotus of Light. The links are all in the description. But Ian, welcome back to the show. I'm glad we started off on this foot. And, you mentioned angelic magic as opposed to, in my experience, what seems more readily available, which is this sort of darker path, right? And it isn't obvious to the novices because of this scientific materialist environment that many of us find ourselves in, where things are sort of casted in a shadow, and because of this sort of lumping together, people think, well, since these people who are clearly lying or corrupt or whatever your umbrage is with them, since they say it's bad, well, then it must be good, right? And that might be true for some things like astrology or maybe even tarot, right? But when it comes to making pacts, doing ceremonial magic and things like this is all stuff that is reserved for experts and pros and people who are willing to take those risks, because it is very dangerous stuff. But where did you initially find yourself on this path with? Were you at first confronted with those dark options, those dark paths, and did you have the sort of did you have any experiences that kind of showed you what else was possible? I mean, explain to us how you found yourself in this position, because I know angelic magic is something that we're going to talk about today, and it's something you practice.
Yeah, I've been doing angelic magic for about 3 years now, but for whatever reason, I really not for whatever reason, I had an ex who was definitely into the darker stuff, and I actually think she used black magic on me, and I even know kind of the moment she used it, and she just sort of got influence over me somehow. And I ended up I was fresh off divorce, and I guess I was sort of emotionally vulnerable, and I don't sit here and pretend to say that I'm some superhuman person. And so she just sort of either through just normal psychological manipulation means or through magic, but she was definitely a practicing dark magician that she was very open about. She somehow got her hooks into me, and I really saw firsthand a lot of her using darker magic, and I didn't like it. And I'm kind of like an oppositional defiant kind of person. And in this case, it drove me into angelic magic, and then I just really dove into it. And finally, I realized that I'd made a terrible mistake. We split. But I learned a lot from her over that period of time. And I actually rubbed shoulders with and met a lot of people who were darker magicians, I guess. One of the things that surprised me is not all of them were evil. Most of them were just people who were very traumatized and seemed like something in life had made them feel disempowered. And they were kind of like, F you, dad. Not specifically their father, but I mean, just in the sense of F you, authority, F you, mainstream. I'm going to get powerful. And they start dabbling with this dark magic because really they want to feel in control. And what they're really actually looking for, I'm convinced, is healing. In fact, there's one of them sort of changed teams and is now an angelic magician as well. After decades of being a dark magician, he claims the angels came to him and said, this is your final warning. If you continue on this path, you'll be damned forever. And they also gave him a vision of all the negative stuff that he had put out there by teaching people dark magic and by teaching them to subjugate their will to the demons, right, with pacts and whatnot. And so he got a glimpse, for whatever reason, of what he had wrought. And so he's very much on the redemption path, but he's pretty concerned, about how things are going to be as far as his soul goes. because of all the magic he's wrought. But magic, how it first began for me, we kind of alluded to this before we started recording, although I don't know how much we recorded there, I guess. But you talked about how 9/11 is coming up. In fact, this might come out in 9/11. And my awakening process very much centered around 9/11. I mean, I was a very spiritual kid. I was very interested in like Atlantis. I knew it really existed. My father said no, and I usually just took whatever my father said as true. But when he said Atlantis didn't exist, I was like, that is not true. I just knew that it wasn't true. I knew like the Kennedy assassination didn't make sense when I just barely even looked into it. I was like, I think those conspiracy guys that my dad always mocks might be right. And so I always kind of was interested in the weird off the beaten path stuff. But then when the hormones hit when I was like 12 or 13, it was girls, 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 and nothing else. That was all I cared about. And I became very sort of like, I don't know, dim-witted. Like I swear I shaved off 40 IQ points. And I just wasn't interested in anything occult or anything like that. And then I took this Religions of India class. It was the winter term 2000. So it started in 2000 and ended in 2001. And I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I got to this passage where it said, where Krishna is talking to Arjuna, and he says, Arjuna says to Krishna, I can't kill my cousin. And Krishna says, oh, you can't kill your cousin. That's fine. He's like, what are you talking about? We're here on this frozen in time battlefield. And like, there's a guy over there with like an arrow through his head. Obviously, that guy's dead. And Krishna was like, well, you're mistaking the body, which are more like clothes, for the soul. And then he says, what your cousin truly is, sword cannot cut it, fire cannot burn it, water cannot drown it, air cannot wither it, for the Atman is immortal, changeless, and eternal. And when I read that line, and I'm, it's not exactly how the line goes, very close though, I felt like there was this gong, like this bell went off in me. And that is really the moment of when my adult spiritual awakening began. At the end of that same term, I had like not eaten really for probably like, I don't know, a week or at least 4 or 5 days. I hadn't eaten much because it was the end of the term. I was cramming a sting up all night. I wasn't smoking weed. I hadn't smoked weed in like 2 weeks for all the finals and all this kind of stuff. And the minute I got done with school, the first thing I wanted was to go take a bong rip. And I took 2 huge Sobe bong rips, and I couldn't even play Mario Kart. I was like banging into the wall, and they were shooting me with turtle shells and laughing at me. And I was like, man, I can't even play this. And I tried to watch them. I couldn't even watch them. And I went in my bedroom, and I laid down, and I had this really intense vision that showed all these politicians that were possessed by demons. And I saw this like horrible undulating black wave and this terrible clacking noise. And then it panned out, and it showed that there was this skull made of flesh-eating scarab beetles over the continent of Africa, especially Central Africa. And I didn't really understand what that meant. I think it was just like all the black magic that's been perpetrated on the different places that have been colonized, and just like the death and genocide and stuff that's happened in Africa. It's been a particularly difficult place to live for a long, long time for a variety of reasons. And so I'm not exactly sure what that part meant. But then it showed me a map of the United States from space, and all of a sudden I saw this, like a droplet going into a pond and how the ripple comes out. I saw something, but with like real kinetic force, slam into right where New York was, and this ripple appeared. And then in that ripple, there appeared this dark wave, and it smashed against the West Coast. And along the West Coast, there was this thin little line of light. And of course, I was on the West Coast at the time, and I'm not saying like, certainly nowadays I would question whether the hope of humanity lies in the West Coast of the United States, right? But at the time, that was who tried to resist what was to come. And this wave hit the wall of light that shot up, and it stopped the wave. And then the wave had within all these different like deep sea fish and like barracuda and stuff like that, and alligators and stuff, like water animals that are like really like kind of scary looking, and even like those deep sea like angler fish with the really sharp teeth. And they all started like kind of like fighting with each other a little bit. And then the wave drew up even bigger, and it slammed. And again, this line of light rose up to meet it. So then that wave of, or that like ocean of blackness, it was getting really thick and viscous, like tar now. Like it had been oily before, but now it was getting thicker and viscous. And they were actually really fighting with each other, these different like monsters in it. And then the wave rose up so high that it went like off the earth, and then it slammed again. And then this light rose up to meet it, and where the blackness hit that light, it started shaking and vibrating, and it turned into light, and this light then went all the way around the planet. And this voice said to me, and the light of humanity shall spread once more across the earth. And I was like, what the actual fuck was that? Because I had no context for this. I was just watching Beavis and Butthead a year or two prior, really not making use of my intelligence for anything other than, I guess, maybe some role-playing games and board games or whatever, video games maybe, but I was just really not doing anything with my life, and I wasn't paying any attention, certainly, to anything spiritual. So this was like, what the actual fuck was that? And then 8 months later, 9/11 happened, and it took me until later in the day, and I go, oh my God, that's that thing from that weird tripped out thing that I had last year. There also was, like, it talked about a past life, which I'm not going to share, but a very personal past life. And I started having really intense dreams about that past life. I ended up even translating it because the name was in a foreign language and it made perfect sense. So it was a very strange experience. And then 9/11 happened. And for whatever reason, on 9/11 was able to figure out, wait a minute, why didn't they have pop-up surface-to-air missile turrets at the Pentagon? We've had that technology since the 60s. Surely they have that. Otherwise, the Russians would have already attacked from the air the Pentagon. Like, how the hell did these guys slip through? And I broached it with my friends saying, in World of Warcraft, or regular Warcraft, Warcraft 2, what's the first thing you do? And they said, well, you got to put up air defense, because if the other guy speed builds and gets Griffin Riders or dragons, which can hit the ground or the air, but can only be hit by things that can hit air. And they said, well, you got to build arrow towers because you need static air defense, or else if the other guy power builds, then you'll just get wiped out. Duh. And I said, where was the air defense around the Pentagon? And all my friends, they were like, and the blood drained from their face, and they looked down and they were just like really contemplating it. And then one of them goes, no. That would mean the government was in on it. And I said, but it would certainly seem to imply that, but that doesn't answer my question. Where was the air defense? I was like, why weren't there jets? Why weren't there jets scrambled? Why weren't there surface-to-air missile pop-up turrets around the Pentagon? How did the Pentagon get hit? And they didn't have any answer. A few weeks went by, and then the guy that I bought weed from, he goes, hey, have you heard any of these 9/11 conspiracy theories? And I was like, oh my God, thank you. And he introduced me to Mike Rupert. I knew about Bill Cooper, the guy who wrote Behold a Pale Horse. And I'd read a lot of conspiracy theory stuff. I didn't put a lot of stock in that kind of stuff until 9/11. Well, the stealing of the election with Bush and Gore, that also, I knew that was stolen, but I didn't really, nowadays I would say it's kind of like the water I swim in, but back then I didn't really care about conspiracies or think about it until 9/11 happened. And it matching that vision was like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's really uncanny. And you said that was about 8 or so months before the event. What was that like, that time period before 9/11? I mean, so much has changed since then, but Y2K was this sort of all the rage a year prior. But yeah, can you speak to the mindset of the average person back then? Maybe even the state
not a day
of
goes by
conspiracy?
Not a day goes by that I don't miss pre 9/11 America.
Yeah,
people who weren't young adults, at least then, they really don't know what they've lost. They really don't understand. I didn't even understand it, but the dollar was insanely strong in the 90s. I traveled to Europe a couple times in the 90s. Man, it was ridiculous. The dollar was just so strong. And the economy, you could randomly buy any random stocks, because they were inflating for the big crash to come. You could buy any stock and make money. I mean, I didn't really do that, unfortunately, but a lot of people did. And the main thing was you just were so free. You could just do whatever the hell you wanted, as long as it wasn't patently illegal. And there's stuff that was borderline illegal, like toilet papering and tortilling someone's house, to razz each other as kids. And nobody really, it's oh, okay, kids. If it was a constant thing, then maybe you get in trouble. But generally, the adults would just kind of roll their eyes and whatever. And they didn't care. The boomers, to their credit, to a certain extent, and also to their loss, raising us Gen X kids, they just let us do whatever the fuck it seemed. We went all over the place, I went all over Portland, rode the buses by myself, all kinds of stuff. you know, and you'd go to the airports and you could see your grandmother come right out of the gate and you give her a hug right there on the spot. And the thing is, I don't feel any safer with all that additional security. I feel actually way less safe. A big part of that is I'm aware, obviously, that like the government's the threat here. And so all that security is for them to have total access and you to have none, right? You know what I mean? They're the ones they want to have that. It's like Kennedy and his Secret Service guys getting off the back of the car, right? So.
Yeah, well, and I just had a really incredible podcast about JFK, so I mean, don't get me started. There's so much I can say about that. But when it comes to 9/11, JFK, and a lot of other events, some that we even talked about the last time you were on the show, the Ohio disaster and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
It seems over and over again that there's this theme of ritualistic aspects that beckon the question, are we being traumatized at a mass level? And given your practice with angelic magic, I mean, do you think that the average person can equip themselves to help fight against this? I mean, how do you see us turning the tide? Because it seems like since 9/11 we've only had an escalation of fear and who else to turn to but these higher forces?
Wow. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I think, one of the main things the angels have worked on with me, as I moved up the spheres, I started with the angels and then I would work with the archangels, and I don't know, I'm very, very psychic. I just am. And it's just like something I had a lot when I was a kid. Like I said, it shut off for like a decade there, but I've worked to develop it as well. And so I can hear the angels, and not everyone can. Like I can teach people to summon the angels and have real world effects for them if it's in alignment with their soul's highest good and the divine plan of the Most High. I always make sure people add those caveats to angelic magic, but I can teach people to do that. But most people can't hear the angels. Some people can. I'm not the only one. Like I've had other students or friends or whatever. But because I was able to talk to them, Archangel Raziel, who's key in summoning the 72 lower angels, I one day said, well, I feel a little uncomfortable always asking the angels. It's funny because this lines up with JFK, I just realized. I said, I feel uncomfortable telling these beautiful beings of light what to do. And Archangel Raziel said, why? That's literally their purpose. Their purpose is to answer prayers, or a more refined form of prayer, ceremonial ritual magic, right? Which is just a more refined form of prayer with greater intent. That's why some people who are very devout can pray and the world will change around them, right? They can pray. I mean, I don't know how many of your listeners know someone like that, but if you know someone, especially who's like a true good Christian, who's like really gets it, and they're like a truly good Christian, which is fairly rare, they very often can pray and have absolute miracles happen. I've seen it. My mom's that way. I know someone else's mother who's that way, and they're just very loving, devout people. And it doesn't work every time, but I will ask my mom to pray for me for sure, because sometimes I want a little extra help. And so I said, Raziel, well, that's great. That's what they were designed for, is to answer these prayers. And I said, but I feel uncomfortable to some degree. And I want to ask, what can I do to serve the celestial current, right? Ask not what you can do for your country, or what your country can do for you, right? But I did literally ask this, and Raziel said, now you're asking the right questions. And so the angels then put me through this, I don't know, my paces, I guess, to see if I was worthy, and also to affect change to where I was doing change, because it's invocation when you work with the angels. The angels are asking you to change your inner world, and that does impact the outer world, right? You sort of change your vibration, you attract to you circumstances that are more pleasurable and nice and whatever, more harmonious, right? Because angels create greater harmony in your life, whereas the demons create greater chaos as a general rule. And with demons, you're doing evocation. So it's change the outer world to what I want, but that changes you inside. It corrupts you on the inside. In the same way that when you work on yourself on the inside with the angels, that'll change your external experience, and in a way that's much more harmonious than if you had tried to design it yourself with your mind. And so I said, what can I do? And so they had me prove my worthiness. They had me start doing lots of charity. They had me for a while texting or calling people and I would have to inform them that the angels had told me to text or call them, and that was, it turns out, like, to test my faith, because it was very hard. I was like, do I have to say the part about the angels? And they were like, yes, you must. And it was very embarrassing at the time. And I just was like, especially when people would like leave me on red and they'd be like, you okay, bro? I mean, like, and so I had to push through that. And then as I moved my way up, and then he taught me how to contact the principalities, which are the choir directly above the archangels. And they're the messengers who go between all three spheres and all nine choirs, all the heavenly celestial realms and earth. And so the principalities were the key in to access these higher choirs. And again, they really put me through the paces and really wanted me to do real, like, more than I could afford levels of charitable giving. And then as I moved up to the second sphere, which is the virtues, powers, and dominions, it became much more of an internal experience. And it was much more about me confronting my shadow and ways that I sin, not in the sense of like the Christian idea of sin, but where I was missing the mark. One of the things that struck me about the angels is they have a very different attitude towards sex than most people would think, because most people think that angels incorrectly are Christian in nature. The angels are mentioned, Archangel Michael in particular is mentioned in one of the, some of the oldest Sumerian cylinder seals we have, mention Archangel Michael. So, I mean, these beings existed long before Christianity, and Christianity has put their ideas around sex and, I guess, morality in general over the angels. And it's very similar in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like a lot of the stuff like stealing or hurting people, anytime you did anything, the angels kind of thing is what this action you're taking, is it in any way weakening your own free will or the free will of others? Or are you binding their free will, right? That's why, like, violence is, generally speaking, right out, unless it's to protect the innocent. But violence is you're impacting someone else's free will because you're attacking them physically. If you're doing a binding spell on them, or like a love magic spell, and you're not saying, I want to attract love to me, which allows the angels to orchestrate that. And the angels might say, well, that's not in your soul's highest good right now. You need to work on yourself, so they'll veto that spell, whereas the demons would bring it to you. If you say, I want Jennifer Connelly, right, the actress from Labyrinth, she's probably in her 50s now. Like, if I say, I want to bind her to love me, now I'm binding her will. And that's the main thing the angels don't like. And so their attitudes around sex and sexuality are all around free will. I mean, it is very much not unlike, I don't know what they think about gay sex, because that hasn't come up for me personally. I don't know whether they would care about that one way or the other. I do know that when it came to straight stuff, it was always about consent 100%, and that things like pornography or strippers, right, or prostitutes are all, like, they consider them horrible because you're binding the free will. And people say, oh, but there's money changing hands and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, they're, it's not something that they want to do. It's something that's circumstantial and usually based on their history. And I'm not trying to like bag on sex workers here by any means. I'm just saying what the angels said. And basically they said that for a man, you should never have any interaction with a woman unless she wants your seed. That was the term they used. Unless she wants your seed. And then if she wants your seed, it's about you being ethical and moral within that situation. And that you should never try and be like a player guy manipulating women, right? Because then again, you're messing with their free will because you're not giving them full information. And of course, it works in reverse as well. Women doing these things to subvert men's free will. And probably more women have cast love spells on men than vice versa, if I had to make a guess, actually. So it was mostly about consent was what they were really, really in free will above all else. And so I had to go through and really heal and integrate my mistakes and my trauma especially. And I'm still working on that. It's actually something I'm really working on right now with angels. It's very difficult. And I would say for most people, the best thing they could do to prepare themselves for what's to come is take care of the physical stuff if you can, because that is important, having food and water and medicine. And if you have enough money to want to preserve your money, then gold and silver as your baseline. And then if you feel like you want to go beyond that, there's certain cryptos you can get into or whatever, but really take care of your physical needs first. And then, don't spend too much time on all the financial stuff. Really, the key is to work on your trauma above and beyond anything else. I'm really convinced, because you said they're doing mass traumatization of people. It's absolutely true. Basically, everyone you interact with is traumatized to some degree in this country because of the mass media. And, things like the killing of JFK, and that was a killing of the king ritual pretty clearly. Everything about the way it was done, Camelot beforehand, elevating him to the status, it's hinting that he's a king, or putting it out there in the public consciousness that he's a king, and then they kill him. And it's very ritualistic. And same thing in 9/11, there's a guy who's falling out of the tower. It's very curious. The guy's falling out of the tower, and he perfectly makes the hangman tarot card. It's a very infamous picture of that. And that's like, is that the collective unconscious? Is that part of the spell? Did someone force this man's body to take that position as, like remotely in some way? It's hard to say. But
or even the artists, even the artist who created that sculpture of himself, I think he was like a giant, and there was like airplanes flying into his face, and his office, his art space was in the Twin Towers, and he created that all prior to, the event. But yeah, I don't know how accurate that is. I mean, this is a theory I found on the internet or heard somewhere, but yeah, there's many examples of that weird collective consciousness and symbology, predictive programming, as some call it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's intentionally done. The 2012 Olympic Games opening ceremony is like the most blatant example of that. It's a COVID ritual. It's what brought COVID into existence. And one of the things a lot of people don't understand is like the way magic works in the Kali Yuga anyways, which is nearly over. I'm actually interviewing, or have interviewed, Bibhu Dev Misra, the scholar who sort of cracked the code on the yugas, and I'm certain he's right. And that's going up on my channel here in a couple of weeks. He's incredible. But during the Kali Yuga, it seems that the way magic works is it's very, very much psychological in nature, and that it does rely on this co-creative process. People say all the time, "Oh, everything's physical." Oh, is it really? Because literally everything we're doing right now appeared in someone's mind prior to that microphone being created, those headphones being created, these computers being created. It was a thought first. It actually comes from the subtle realms before it comes to the physical realm. You mentioned earlier about the dead materialism that came out of 1830s to 1850s British Royal Society. Prior to that, almost all scientists were very holistic and very, looking at the big picture. They weren't as specialized. There was always people who were more specialists, and that's when the specialists took over for the generalists. And most of the real genius in science has happened from people who are more of that generalist mold, right? Like, for example, Isaac Newton was a generalist. He was an alchemist. He was, a physicist. He was a mathematician. He was all these different things, and that allows him to bring it all together with these really incredible theories. And so there's been a very intentional combination of making everyone into dead materialists, and then also using things like these mass events and, as you see, the predictive programming. And what did I often say it's akin to from a magical point of view is when hackers will hijack a bunch of computers and turn them into zombie computers, and then they have all this brute force, and they can then do a DNS attack. They hack all these boomers' computers who click on the email they shouldn't, and their computer is now a zombie computer, and they have vast legions of these computers, and then they can do a DNS attack, which is very difficult for most websites to deal with, right? And that's why you have Cloudflare and all these things that come up to try and prevent that sort of thing. But my point is that likewise, when you do the 2012 Olympic Games, everyone's really all right, it's the Olympics. And then they see hey, what is that giant coronavirus symbol that's now with all the LEDs? Literally they have the coronavirus, the shape of it with the spikes and everything. And then they show a bunch of doctors and nurses dancing a ton. Where do we see that in 2020? And then they have this thing where this gigantic black cloaked skeleton magician appears, and he starts waving this giant bone wand, and up one of the beds spins up in the air, and there's the children on it. He's like menacing the children, and then he extends the wand, and out of it come fireballs. I mean, it's the most obvious black magic thing I've pretty much ever seen in my life that's been done publicly, and it was the coronavirus ritual. But what they then did is they didn't go, well, that's it, we don't have to do anything. They then spent the next 8 years meticulously further planning something that was probably already a decade in the planning by that point, because the Rockefeller lockstep document came out around that time, 2010 to 2012 range. So they'd clearly been planning the events of 2020 for quite some time, but they used that magical spell because they had all these people with open minds who didn't understand what they were seeing because they're dead materials, and it went right down in their subconscious. And they basically hacked all these people's minds to get a brute force attack on reality to try and change it to their will. Well, the good news is that way back in 2001, when 9/11 happened, by like November of that year, I had figured out, because I have something called claircognizance where I can just know something's true, even if I don't have all the evidence, and I can often then reverse engineer it. But I came across the idea that the world was secretly run by black magicians, and I just immediately knew it was true. Even though it was the most insane thing I'd ever heard in my fucking life in 2001. I mean, people kind of take it for granted now that a huge amount of people are like, oh yeah, Satanists, pedos, like run things, right? And I call them Malachians. But the satanic force, runs the planet, and that there's people who are using black magic. And like, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily common knowledge now, but probably 20% to 30% of people are at least familiar with the concept and have weighed it in their minds to some degree, whether or not it's true. And probably the majority of those people have heard it, probably have concluded that, yes, it's true. And I would say somewhere between 10 to 15% of people kind of know this. I don't know, that might be overstating it, but I think that's about right. Whereas when I figured this out in like November of 2001, I would say it was 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 100,000, maybe 1 in a million. It was exceedingly rare, the people who kind of believe stuff that's fairly common knowledge. And that means that people are waking up at like an incredible rate. And, we talk about the Luciferians and Malachians a lot on my channel, and I believe that the Luciferians have completely unplugged from the Malachians and aren't helping them anymore. And that's why ever since 2020, every PSYOP since 2020, the big one, the obvious one, right, has been really sloppy. You notice that? Have you noticed how sloppy they are now? Like, when you look at Sandy Hook, for example, right, that was very well done. All the different things that were done under Obama, during the Obama administration, the Bush administration, all the PSYOPs they did back then, they were almost all like actually really well done to where it was very difficult to pierce them. And now they're just sloppy as fuck. Look at what just happened in Lahaina. Right? Like fire turning right corners, and it just so happens that I actually finally saw a couple, but basically there were 1 or 2 modest homes that survived that fire, and every other home that survived was like, $10 to $50 million price tag on it. You don't need Zillow to just take a look at it and see that it's there in Maui on the frickin' beach, and it looks like it's a 6-bedroom house. You know what I mean? Like, do the math, right? You're talking a multi-million-dollar thing, which implies that that's 10% of that person's net worth, something like that, which means they're probably worth 100 mil plus. They're in the club. And those are the ones that were spared. But somebody left some calling cards, I believe, intentionally. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a guy named Hawaiian Real Estate who, he was just a total normie, getting back to that people are waking up fast. If you watch all his videos before Lahaina, he's like, hey, come to Maui, bro, and like hang loose and buy some property, bro. He's just like this Hawaii boomer dude, maybe Gen X, that just selling properties, didn't have a care in the world, just making money hand over fist in Hawaii, I'm sure. And he was like, what the actual fuck when it happened? And he has videos to where there's cars that have no fuel around them that are completely burned to where like cast aluminum has like liquidated away from it, from like the aluminum, like the thing you put your rubber tire on. God, obviously I'm a mechanic. I can't think, but your rims, basically, they're cast aluminum rims, and they're melted. And aluminum has a melting temperature of like 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And all the houses around it were fine, though. And then there was another one that was way far away from everything, and it just had little short grass around it. And again, that car had cast aluminum, like a rack on the ceiling. It was like a SUV or something. And they grabbed it and it just turned to powder. So I was leery of the whole do idea, right? Just because I'm leery of sexy conspiracy theories, because when 9/11 happened, the hologram planes, I actually had someone I later identified as a government op tell me right after 9/11 that there weren't actually planes and they were holograms, except for I knew people who were in Manhattan who felt the wake of a 747 going not that high above sea level, which creates a big wake in the air. And they heard it and saw it, and there's no effing way. And so sexy conspiracy theories often have been developed, especially since 9/11, to draw people's attention away from things that are completely unexplainable, like the lack of air defense. So when I saw the Lahaina thing, I figured, well, they probably just lit fires, paid some poor homeless people to light fires, and then they shut off the water and turned off the sirens and locked it down. After seeing these cars, I actually think that they did use dew, and that's really nice, because using an exotic technology is probably in part to test this technology out. Using an exotic technology is going to raise a lot more very difficult questions, like these cars, than if they had just used standard burning, right? It would have been very difficult for them to do what they wanted to do, just target some but not all houses, right? Because they want to put in a smart city, all that stuff, right? I mean, that's crystal clear to me. That's what the goal was. So this guy shows this video, and since then, they've actually put black wall all the way around Lahaina. Why? That's so obvious. Like, out of respect for the victims. That's like you're in Jersey, you come to this house, and you see that there's this dead mafioso guy with bullet wounds on his chest in the front porch, and they see all these other mafia guys going around with gloves on, picking things up, and they're like, ounce of respect for the family. Please don't look too closely at that corpse. Out of respect for the family. It looks like you guys are cleaning up a crime scene. Oh, no. Looks can be really deceiving. That's why, Hey, Lou, come over here for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, why would you put black fence up around it? And how can you have a National Guard, a secret police, and regular police response surrounding the perimeter of it, but magically you couldn't save anyone on that day? And that one reeks to me of that there was a horrible, evil ritual. Because someone who's actually lived on Maui told me that's not even like, there's better places to have done that. But that's the traditional capital, I guess, of Hawaii, the indigenous capital. And a lot of indigenous people were there, and a lot of children were there. And some of the children, I think, they grabbed them, unfortunately, which is terrifying, and prayers for those children. But a lot of those children just burned in that horrible fire. And I'm pretty sure it's on a ley line. Basically, all the Hawaiian islands are on the ley lines because of all the volcanic activity there. And so that's sending a trauma surge out. But, a funny thing is happening. People are starting to not just go into fear, but they're starting to have the self-preservation starting to kick in for people. People are starting to see it. Like this Hawaiian real estate guy, he was not a conspiracy theory guy, I promise. Before this, you can just tell me maybe he was, but he kept it off his channel because I scrolled back like 8 months and it was all just buy this real estate. And it's like that. A lot of people in Hawaii are waking up. They also killed a bunch of brown people here, right? Indigenous Hawaiians. So like that's another thing that creates that lefty dilemma in their mind, and they're clearly going to try and steal that land. I think they're putting up those fences because they're just going to go ahead and build that smart city.
Yeah.
I think they're just going to build it. And I say, great, make it more obvious what you're doing. And I think that someone melted those cars intentionally to leave a calling card. Doesn't make sense for the Malakians to do that, but think about it. It's high tech. That means that someone who's on there was either just a good pilot, he's not involved in any of the spiritual stuff other than on a subconscious level, and he just said, I'm going to nuke a couple of these cars, and I hope someone finds it, right? And he just beeped it a couple of times when he was flying through. Or it could be, and it doesn't matter if the spirit is moving through someone or if they're actually like more directly communing with the spirit. But I believe that the Luciferian faction couldn't stop that event from happening. And so instead they made it really fucking sloppy so people can see what happened and more people wake up.
Right. Right, and we talked about the differences between the Luciferians and the Malachians in the first interview we've done. So,
Mm-hmm.
folks, I recommend go back and listen to that, and also check out your channel on YouTube, White Lotus of Light, where you talk about that at length. But yeah, this is a tragedy what happened in Lahaina, and we talked about that on a few different episodes, and I had some
Yeah.
people who live in Hawaii on the show to talk about it, so no need
Wow.
to retread. But yeah, I think you're making some interesting points, and it's when it comes to the direct energy weapons, it seems like weather manipulation of some kind could account for it. It seems like the forest fires that have been out of control over the past
Mm-hmm.
decade in the West are connected in some way, where you have the
Yeah,
same
it's the aluminum
situation
that they
going
spray.
on. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe they're doing that on a micro scale in that area. They figured out how to concentrate it, and
Yep.
people may be familiar with this if they're listening to every episode of my show. But Topher Gardner, a past guest on the show, he made the assertion that there are ways you can manipulate the weather to create that effect where certain things would seem to be microwaved and other sort of maybe organic materials that can sustain an electric charge differently would not be affected in the same way. So we're talking about masonry, we're talking about metals, we're talking about human beings.
Mm.
These things would be affected as opposed to a tree or grass, which has a high
Mm-hmm.
concentration of water and also can
Mm.
ground electricity sufficiently enough to not be burnt by it, right? Which is maybe
Mm.
what's going on there, where you see the metals like completely. What's it called when you is it sublimated, right? Sublimation is when
Mm-hmm.
you take a solid and turn it into like a gas or a liquid, right? So yeah, I wouldn't know the technology that can do that, but it seems like others have made a bunch of theories, and I agree with you on the sexy conspiracy theory point. I don't want to be guilty of throwing another conspiracy out there that may lead people astray. So definitely keep an open
Mm-hmm.
mind, folks, but just to focus on what's important is like what happened to those children, and
Yes.
can we
Yes.
not have another situation that just gets brushed under the rug. And I agree with the sentiment that hopefully this wakes some people up. Maybe it's out of sloppiness, or maybe out of just sheer brazenness, that we can recognize what their mistakes are, right? Or however it is that they make them. But when it comes to the angels, it seems like, as you said, free will is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the dark forces, they know that too, and that's a part of
Mm-hmm.
how their magic works, right? I mean, that's kind of what they're manipulating. They're trying to get us
Absolutely.
to sort of betray ourselves by falling
Yep.
into their plot. Now, let me
Yep.
ask you this: for people who maybe waded into occult waters, maybe they were led astray by certain groups or books or something, you know,
Mm-hmm.
do the angels offer redemption? I mean, how easy is
Absolutely.
it for people to turn their life around? I mean, even like the elites, could they, turn their life around after committing such tragedies, or are they damned?
Well, what the angels have told me is that regular angels, right, the 72 named Shem angels, they're sometimes called, um, but that class of angels, the one that are closest to us in vibration, everyone always has access to them. And then you have to be unbelievably foul to lose access to the archangels. But it is possible, and like the evil rulers have that. But everyone can always hear at least angels. The further up you move in the spheres, the more you have to um, you have to purify yourself and come into alignment with natural law and integrate things where you've made mistakes and figure out just how to be a better person. I mean, that's the big thing. Like sometimes people be like, "Oh, how do you know that the angels are, or that you're not being tricked by demons or whatever?" And that is actually a good point. People need to be careful because beings, non-corporeal beings, can very easily lie about their nature. But for me, the proof is in the pudding, or as Jesus said, You should know them by their works. And the angels have got me to quit a 27, 28 year rooted in trauma, hardcore pornography addiction. They have helped me be way less of an angry person, a way more loving and supportive father. I mean, I was a good father before, but I'm a much better father now. I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger. They've helped me heal trauma. They've helped me in my relationship to myself and my masculinity, and also women. One of the things I realized a few years ago is I was really dominated by the dark feminine energy, actually. I was kind of that nice guy who would sidle up next to women and try and get them into bed, while not like being overly aggressive and assertive and honest about what my intentions were, right? That I would be like, oh, I just want to be your friend or whatever. But really, I was like wanting to get close to them and hopefully that we could hook up, right? And that's really like a dark feminine move, actually. It's certainly not like the divine feminine, which we all have some of these energies in balance with inside us. But as a general rule, people who make sperm gametes tend to be more divine masculine, and people who make ovum, egg gametes, which, by the way, those two are absolute. Everybody has either one or the other. Maybe in exceedingly rare cases, someone can have both gametes. I'm not aware of that. I'm pretty sure one or the other sexual organs does not function, and very often they have no gametes at all. People who are both sexes at birth. The old term is hermaphrodites. Intersex, that's the correct term. People who are intersex at birth, but the vast majority of people tend to hold, or are meant to hold, if you're male, the divine masculine frequency, or infernal masculine, and if you're female, the divine feminine or the infernal feminine. However, these dark forces have got everyone to invert and move everything around, and they've created a plague of emasculated men, which I was among them, who are dominated by the dark feminine, very passive aggressive, very dishonest and manipulative. And you see women who are dominated by the dark feminine are the ones who are like, again, not bagging on sex workers. I think that that's fine. I just think that it's probably difficult for people who do that. In the long run, I've known lots of women who were dancers. I've known lots of women who did various different things. And I found in most cases, once they got done doing it, they were like, yeah, that was really draining on me psychologically, doing that kind of work. But so not trying to bag on it, but the dark feminine is very much the OnlyFans girl, just bleeding all these simps dry, getting all these simp men, probably men, stuck in their dark feminine and bleeding them dry. And as a general rule, when women have a choice between a dark feminine male, the nice guy, versus an infernal masculine, the Chad player dude, scumbag, right? The guy who plays bass guitar or whatever. Again, I'm just throwing out like what do you call them? Generalizations or whatever. I've known plenty of bass player dudes who are awesome. But yeah, like just the player dude who's kind of a scumbag and is just there to nail women and mistreat them and treat them like shit and is just very selfish and often narcissistic. Well, that's the infernal masculine. It's a woman. If she's in her feminine at all, she's going to be more attracted to that as a general rule than the men who are in the dark feminine. What women really crave is divine masculine, right? Like Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings, right? Strong, a provider, a protector, noble, in control of his emotions, but also able to feel, wanting to be compassionate, protect the innocent. Women love that. It's the ultimate panty dropper. And I've sort of moved more into that with the help of the angels. And, being stuck in that was really limiting for me. And that was one of the things that the angels helped me move through. And I still have some blind spots and I still have stuff I'm working on. I don't pretend to be enlightened or perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the angels have really helped me to work through these things. And there's so many different things out there in our society that are meant to just lead people away from natural law, but it's reaching a crescendo right now. I mean, like things are really like, it's getting too big to ignore. And whether it's brazenness or sloppiness, and I believe it's sloppiness that's born out of desperation, might sound funny, but ask yourself, has propaganda been increasing or decreasing? Well, it's been increasing. Is it less obvious and more subtle, or is it more obvious and more in your face, right? What about these psyops? Are they getting increasingly obvious and less subtle? That is not the mark of people who are in control. In the 1980s, these people were in total control. Nobody knew that there was dark sorcerers around the world. And they just dominated everything. They did all the bad stuff to the kids back then. Nobody knew about it. Well, they were in total control. And they're in less control now. Yeah. Believe it or not. They really, really are. Well, it doesn't mean they're not powerful or dangerous. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I'm glad you said that. And it's definitely something I want to, I guess, simmer on for a little bit. But I wanted to ask you about the angelic influences on the world and culture, because people often think about Enochian magic as angels, but something you brought up earlier, there's often people who doubt that and say, well, how do you know those were angels that John Dee was evoking, right? He may have thought they were angels, but, you know, he was using a black obsidian mirror, and these other people were involved, and they were swapping wives and things like this. So, you know, given we're all speaking the English language, and there's a whole thought that the Enochian language somehow infused itself into English. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that holds up, or do you think the angelic influences couldn't work like that?
Yeah, that's so interesting. See this right over here, this giant leather-bound books back there? That's actually like limited edition, all of John Dee's writings. And I haven't certainly read that exhaustively. I feel a real resonance with John Dee for some reason. I have not as of yet, and I plan to talk to the angels, I have not as of yet done any Enochian workings. What I find fascinating and interesting, first of all, I like Dee, but I don't like Kelly very much. That was his partner. And it was through Kelly that came the message of wife swapping and stuff like that, which ended up ruining John Dee's marriage, I'm pretty sure, if I recall correctly. So, you know, there's kind of two camps. There's people who like Kelly, or there's people who like Dee. Most people don't like both, you know, or most people don't. Some people, I guess, probably dislike both. But I'm just not sure enough. I have a liking for John Dee that is irrational, perhaps. Like maybe I had a past life, knew him or something like that. I don't know. That said, Enochian workings, I haven't really done them. I've been told by a lot of people that they're, you know, quite dangerous. There's, you know, one thing that is true is when you move up in the spheres, the energy of the higher order angels is quite astonishing. Like when I had just gotten to where I was working with the virtues, and so I was a long way from having an appropriate vibration to go to the first sphere where the Ophanim and Cherubim and Seraphim dwell. I made the mistake once. One of the things I'm able to do, and I use it exceedingly sparingly, pretty much only with the virtue angels now, but I am able to channel. And so I once tried to channel the Ophanim, right? Those are the wheels within wheels that Ezekiel saw, right? With the eyes on the wheels. And that is, in fact, what they look like. At least that's what they appear to me. They're a very interesting class of angels. But anyways, I channeled that, and it was like I was shouting when I couldn't talk without like just shouting. And like with like this crazy reverberation in my voice. I have a recording of it someplace. And when I was experiencing it, I'd been tasered before. It felt like I was being constantly tased, only with like an even higher vibration than that. And it was very awe-inspiring and a bit terrifying. And I couldn't sleep for 12 hours afterwards. I channeled them very late at night, like 11:30 p.m. to midnight. And I couldn't sleep until the next day at 8 to 10 a.m., something like that, even though I was super tired because so much energy had gone through me. So I've heard from people who have done Enochian magic that there's quite a huge amount of energy going through. And that person who also did darker magic was like, found it extremely uncomfortable. I will say, without giving away too much, that the angels are very electromagnetic in nature. I mean, I believe the demons are as well. And they will sort of zap you with celestial lightning to raise your vibration. And so I can't really make an informed comment on Enochian magic itself. What I do find interesting about Enochian, the language, I've never heard that contended before that English has Enochian in it. That's fascinating. For a long time, people thought that John Dee had created Enochian, and that he had just made it out of whole cloth. Except for a funny thing, there was a Italian magician who also claimed to talk to angels about 100 years before John Dee, and I forget his name. But with John Dee, they looked at Enochian, and it had syntax to it that worked, that was logically consistent internally, but it didn't match any syntax of any known human language. So this Italian guy, who a century before John Dee also claimed to talk to the angels, he too had fragments of a language that were completely separate from the ones that John Dee had, except for one thing: they had the same syntax. So it's possible John Dee was quite a scholar. He traveled quite a lot. It's possible he could have come across this man's writings, although he was extremely obscure, and most people didn't even know this until like the 20th century, right? With the greater amount of information. It's possible John Dee saw that and he was smart enough to like mimic that syntax, because he certainly was a polymath genius. I don't know. I think it's real. I think it's a real language. Is it the language of the angels? It's interesting to me. It's intriguing to me. I am not 100% sure on that. And it's not something that I've asked the angels a lot, but I kind of feel like I need to, because you're about the third person in the past month to bring up Enochian magic to me. And so whenever I have that kind of repeated message from the universe, it's maybe something for me to look into.
Yeah, well, it's not an obsession of mine, so I guess it is sort of a synchronicity through and through, because for me, I had recently just had a guest on talking about the Gospel of Thomas, and it caused me to brush off 2 books that I have on the shelf here titled The Forgotten Books of Eden and The Lost Books of the Bible. And the Lost Books of the Bible has the Secrets of Enoch in it, which is I don't know how many pages, but it's not very long. It's sort of brief, but it's all the information of Enoch's account as it would have been in the Old Testament before it was taken out. But yeah, very interesting stuff regardless, and I didn't want to neglect to ask you that, because yeah, it's not every day that I speak with somebody who is versed in this stuff, and it's something that, as a Catholic growing up, I knew about angels. I've, interacted with the concept of like praying to saints and praying to angels, and different angels and saints having different purposes. And it always struck me as, to use a term you just introduced to the show, claircognizance. Is that correct? Yeah, claircognizance. I always had that experience with things like that. Like when I would learn about religion and spirituality, I never really fully ascribed to Catholicism, but certain things rang true with me while I undergone learning all of that stuff as a kid. But regardless, when it comes to the angels, how does someone begin? What do you recommend people do if they're completely new to this? Maybe they don't have a spiritual upbringing. Maybe they do. Where does someone start to, bring this angelic magic into their life safely?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really great question. I actually teach angelic magic classes. I actually have one that has 1 slot left. I might open a second class for like West Coast time. I'm not sure, or maybe another East Coast time. It's currently East Coast time. I'm actually doing that Thursday, the 28th is when the first class is. And I may, like I say, I may open up another one. Classes have to be on Thursdays because of the way the ritual works. But I teach from a specific textbook, although there's a couple of things in the book that I don't like, but I just use the fairly standard, it's, well known, like the Shem talisman and invoking Arzel and then Raziel and then invoking the specific angel I want to work with. So I do teach people that, and I just use as a text. And again, I don't endorse necessarily like this company or this author. He just happened to have a very clear, I'm looking to see if I can find that book. He just happened to have a very clear way of sort of describing things. Hang on. Oh, here it is. And so I use it to teach from, and I have all my students by this text. So this is okay. Just keep in mind, like there's a section in there where the person clearly, whoever was writing that passage of it, like they used a metaphor of basically demonic magic for angelic magic, which was very bizarre and very like distasteful to me, and I didn't like it at all. Talking about doing bad things with angelic magic, but none of the angels allow you to do the things he described. He said, "Oh, you could hurt your enemy or whatever with this with magic, and it'd be that's one way you could manifest the magic, and you'd have to be specific about how you wanted to hurt the person or whatever, and then just use very dark stuff that you wouldn't actually use in angelic magic." It's just a very odd passage, and that's what I mean is like magicians are all able to access the angels, and most are able to access the archangels. Beyond that, I am not aware of there being any book out there on the principalities or the virtues or the powers or dominions or both of them, cherubim, seraphim, how to interact with them, whereas you can interact with the darkest of demons. I think it's just because we're in the Kali Yuga, but this is the book, The 72 Angels of Magic. And again, I can't really endorse Damon Brand. I'm not against him either. I just can't endorse, like, I'm not endorsing that person, other than this book is the one that I used to teach from. And I know a lot of subtleties that aren't discussed in the book, about just certain things that I do a little bit different than the book that I found to work. I just talk a lot with people about like why magic works and, how it works and how to word your magic in a way that's extra protecting yourself. And something that people should understand is that if you don't like it here on Earth and you're someone who wants to like transcend, and you're like, hey, I want to be a Buddhist and transcend to nirvana and escape samsara. Well, you definitely don't want to do magic then, because any foreign magic you do, it binds you more tightly to the wheel of samsara. It makes it far more likely you'll reincarnate here on Earth. Far more likely, because you're using your free will to co-create reality. And that just sort of binds you to the wheel more. Now, I'm willing to do it because I actually weirdly like it here. I've been here a long, long time, and I actually really like it here. Sometimes humans I find deeply frustrating, but I love this planet. I love this experience of life. And so for me, that's not a grim prospect. But that is something that I would warn people against, is that do be aware that there's a very heavy karmic burden to magic. Now, if you're using a lot of magic to help people, you're accruing good karma. That's the thing. You're accruing good karma, but you're also more or less guaranteeing that you'll reincarnate here on Earth. Now, some people don't believe in reincarnation. That's their choice. And I guess if you don't believe in reincarnation, then it doesn't have that downside. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying it to someone without mentioning that. I always tell my students that by the way, it does make it more likely that you'll incarnate here. But the 72 angels, these, Shem angels, the lower order angels, the ones that are closest to us in vibration, they're very gentle and wonderful, and they can help you do lots of things. It's really important how you phrase things, like when there's the requests in there of different powers. Like I always say, if it is in my soul's highest good and in accordance with the divine plan of the Most High, when I'm invoking the specific power of the angel, I always add that. And then that way I'm just telling the angels, like, they would probably veto it anyway, because the difference between demons and angels among them, many of them, is that if you ask a demon, hey, let's say you had, like I do, like I'm struggling with back pain right now. Let's say you had back pain, and I'm not, although I was many, many years ago, but let's say you're a bit of an opiate addict, right? And you have back problems, and you're like, I really need money. And you summon a demon, you say, I want $1 million. And they're like, so just to be clear, you want $1 million no matter what? And you're like, yeah, that's why I summoned you. And they said, so you want $1 million regardless of what the consequences are? And you say, yeah. And they go, I just want to be utterly clear on this. You want $1 million no matter what form that takes and what happens to you afterwards? And you say, yes. And the demons go, asked you 3 times, you got it. And the next day, your mom dies and she had $1 million life insurance accident. And you start putting 2 and 2 together and realizing, oh my God, that magic I did, I think I killed my mom and got her insurance policy. And you already have an opiate addiction because you have a bad back. And next thing you know, because you have all this money and you feel really guilty, you OD on fentanyl after your life spirals downward, right? you're in the exact same situation. You summon an angel and say, I want $1 million. They'll look down and they can see, because they're higher dimensional beings, they can see especially short-term branches in reality. And they'll just see, oh, if we did that, there's really no way to get you $1 million quickly. That isn't going to harm the free will of others. And also, if you got this $1 million, it wouldn't go well for you because you haven't done the internal work yet. And so that's going to create less harmony in your life, vetoed. So angels treat you like you're a child and demons treat you like you're an adult, is one way of looking at it. But I would much rather have guardrails on these kind of forces, such as the angels vetoing what I do. And they have vetoed requests of mine in the past. And I mean, part of it is like, one of the things I teach people is I teach people all the subtleties to magic, because you can do the ritual perfectly exactly right. But then if you're like thinking about the ritual constantly after the fact, doubting it or whatever, there's ways that you can mess up your own spell. And so it can be difficult to discern, like, did the angels just veto it or did I mess it up? Right. And I found that when I first started, I'd have like maybe 40% to 50% hit rate. But it was because most things I was asking for, I just wasn't really ready for. I'd also have crazy things, like one time I asked for money and I was really desperate, and I'd actually worked my way by that point pretty deep in the second sphere. And I asked for money, and literally the next day, a client gave me $1,000 tip. $1,000 tip, which was like absolutely life-saving at the time. It was a lot of money for me in that moment. Grand's not that huge in the grand scheme of things, right? It doesn't pay rent, but still, like, most people don't tip $1,000. And I didn't say anything to that person. It just like that was how the day after the ritual, that was how it manifested. And so one of the things is that you can get hooked on like having these things happen or whatever. And I think that that's really kind of missing the beauty of what the angels can do, which is the angels can start having you change your internal blockages so you can just tap into that already naturally available abundance by aligning you. Another way I describe it is that if reality is a vibration, dark magicians will grab that vibration, they'll bend it, and they'll bring it, bind it to their will, and they'll just hold it like a spring, and they'll hold it, and eventually that it'll snap back, and it'll hit them across the face or whatever. Usually whatever they did, they have to like re-up on the spell, they have to go deeper, they have to take another pack, they have to do whatever. It's just like that first hit of heroin, and then you got to take more and more and more, and then eventually, it doesn't end well. But they're trying to change reality to their will, whereas with an angelic magician, if you're doing it correctly, you're trying to change yourself to where you're in greater alignment with natural law, like a surfer that's riding a wave of reality. That same wave to somebody else might have them go tumble, 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 and even drown. But when you master yourself, then you can ride that wave like a surfer can. And you'll also find that when you're opening yourself up to the grace of what the angels think is best for you, it's almost always better than what your mind thought. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, wow. Wise words. I really appreciate that. And, obviously, folks should go and seek out that class. I would love to share that link with folks. And if you do make another time or slot for the West Coast available, do let me know, because we do have a big audience out west. But as we
if I have the interest, I'll do it. It's just a matter of, I keep my classes small. Like I have a 5-person cap on it. Astrology is different. You can teach a lot of people with that, but with magic, because you witness each other's ritual, and that's part of what boosts it, is that everyone does their ritual together. That boosts it, that same amplification that we talked about with the dark magicians and the hijacking people's brains with the 2012 Olympics. Here you're consenting to have this other person witness you, a person who's not a muggle. That's key. Someone who's there and sort of supporting you in the ritual. That will amplify your magic, but it's with full consent then, and with full being honest about what the intentions are for the people with whatever their spells. And most people I'm always so touched by what my students, they're almost always the beautiful things. I want to help my dad. I want to help my kids struggling at school and is getting bullied. And I want to, people almost always have these really beautiful things they want to do with the magic. They're just naturally use it correctly, like in non-selfish means. That doesn't also mean that you can't ask for more abundance in your life. You absolutely can. for a lot of people, what the lack of abundance is it's some kind of internal blockage that you can heal, and then that's even more powerful than the angelic magic. There's nothing wrong with asking for things to help yourself out, as long as you're also like just being a loving and generous person in the world, you know. And because if you start getting selfish pretty soon, you're probably just not even going to want to work with the angels at all. You'll be like, oh, I'm going to work with demons, right? So but you do have to be careful, because it is you know, it's crazy, like to be able to kind of like enter a cheat code on reality is a very potent thing, and you have to really have real reverence around it, and you have to I think have the right attitude around it. First of all, the angels will veto it eventually. If you're just being selfish all the time, they'll just veto it. You know, you really have to balance that. And when you ask for abundance, it's considered good form to like tithe 10%, not to a church, but to like find a local charity. You know, like I used to work with DV clients, so like I often give to domestic violence shelters for women, things like that. So yeah, whatever your charity of choice might be. So anyways, there's more to it, but yeah, I will. I'll go ahead and open up a second class, and worst case, nobody signs up, I'll just close it down, no problem.
Right.
So I'll say there's 6 slots then available. There's one more in a class that's filling, and then I'll make another one available. I'll probably just keep it at East Coast time, because it's much harder to help the East Coasters than it is the West Coasters.
Right on.
Because it's kind of longer. So yeah.
Well, and I hope those who feel called seek this out, because it's definitely something that I think can change people's lives. I've experienced it in my own life with prayer and energy work. And yeah, I mean, I definitely need to reassess. I think every year people should reassess where they're at. But yeah, maybe that'll come to fruition in the form of signing up for your class. But as we wind down here, any final thoughts for folks? I know you're someone who looks forward to the future. Any thoughts of what's to come? You do have a YouTube video titled 2023, the Year of the UFO, and I'm wondering, is there anything on that horizon that you think's coming up, or anything else that we can expect from 2023 as we come to a close here?
Yeah, so that's a great video that I actually need to release the second part. I hurt my back really badly a few days ago, and so I wasn't able to get out part 2 of that. I'll be getting that out in the next few days, but it's a great interview with Walter Bosley, who is pretty well known as one of the more serious and I think credible researchers in sort of ufology. But that title wasn't anything more than what's already happened, although it's pretty clear to me, there's this book called The Report from Iron Mountain, and in it they mention 3 ways that you could take over the planet. And it's a pandemic, climate crisis, and a fake alien invasion. Right? These are all pretty well known now in conspiracy circles, not sometimes always known as that those 3 are linked, actually. And if you look, there's a lot of media about all 3 of those right now, right? Like that looked like they were going to come back with masks and stuff. But then, hey, another sign of the times of things being positive, people push back on that. So they had to roll it back really quickly. Like Kaiser Permanente in San Jose, California had to roll it back. A medical place had to roll it back. That's stunning to me. A historically black college, and then Lionsgate, which is a very creepily named production company, they had to roll it back as well. There's something to do with the crucifixion of Christ and the Lion's Gate. I don't remember right off the top of my head. And that's why that film company is named after that. But yeah, so I am of the opinion that things are going to get very dicey in the next few years. Probably 2024 is going to be a real shit show. There's going to be the next election. Like, remember how bad it got during 2020? There's going to be definitely some shenanigans and awfulness. I also feel like it might be the year when finally the gloves come off, certainly no later than March of 2025 in this, conflict between the elites, which I also think it's even more than just Luciferian versus Malachian. Like, I think both those groups to some degree have really factionalized in the last few years. And that there's a lot more internecine fighting among the elites than people are aware of. There's a lot of assassinations going on of rich people and so forth. Not the uber rich, although, a couple years ago, there was that plane or helicopter crash with one of the Rothschilds. One of the high-up Rothschilds died in that. which could have been an assassination. Was David Rockefeller just 1 trillion years old, or was he killed? Some people say he was killed. I mean, he was 1 trillion years old, so do keep that in mind. But I do always wonder when I see these very high profile, and for both a Rockefeller and a Rothschild to die within the past 3 years, and these were guys at the very pinnacles of power, right? There's much deeper layers, the Venetian black nobility stuff, but of known power brokers, these guys are real heavyweights, and that they died. And Zbigniew Brzezinski died. Was that just like we got lucky and those guys were old? Could be. Could also be that something else happened there. But where you can definitely see assassinations taking place is in the crypto world. It's very common right now. Crypto billionaires getting killed left, right, and center. And that's a very important battlefront, the whole new financial system that's going to be coming online in 2025. So I think it's possible that in 2024, we could even see them get real desperate and roll out the fake alien invasion. I don't think it's happening this year. I don't think they've been doing enough. It's funny, my brother, who doesn't believe in any of this kind of stuff, is actually someone on board with me about this possibility of a fake alien invasion, because I was just like, does this make any sense to you? How much it's in the media? And he was like, trying to write it off, but he is starting to wonder now a little bit. And he pointed out that you would have to have a more definitive proof of aliens that would be brought forward before you could then run a fake alien invasion. So that Avi Loeb guy just found supposed extraterrestrial metal spheres or whatever off the coast of some place in Asia. And he's, it's a meteorite or whatever, but this guy also contended that Uamuna or whatever it was, remember that long, weird object that came in and then it left the solar system? Which that's weird in and of itself, that thing was able to leave the solar system after, how did it manage to slingshot around the sun? That's crazy, and not just get sucked in. So they would have to bring out more tangible evidence before they could run that psyops, I feel like. So, I would look for more things like that. Perhaps another shooting down of a UFO like they supposedly did at the beginning of the year, but this time bringing forward wreckage of some kind. So, I think that 2024 things are going to get nuts, and then 2025 to 2030 is really, I think that's going to be when the Luciferians take over from the Malachians. And that's going to be, at that point, I think there'll be some kind of full-blown open conflict between these two groups. I don't think it'll last that long. I don't think it'll last more than a year or two, the major sort of fight, right? It might only even last a few months. It's possible, with advancements in technology, it may not take that long. I don't know. But 2030 and beyond, it seems like, according to what the angels say anyway, that'll be much better. And also the astrology improves quite a bit around 2026, 2027. The astrology spends all kinds of hard angles to the outer planets, all kinds of just it's just been really rough for years now, the astrology. That's the other thing I do, is that I'm a Vedic astrologer, and so I look at people's natal and Navamsa charts. And with your natal chart, it's your first 40 years of life, and then Navamsa, I'm in the school of thought that it's your second half of life, and I have a very different first and second half of life that very much weighs out in these charts. That's something that I can tell people, is that it sometimes helps to have a little bit of guidance, but at the end of the day, what people really need to do is take care of their physical needs, and then immediately start working on trauma and healing your trauma and integrating your shadow. Because one of the things the angels have said to me is that there's going to be an event, a bottleneck event, they call it. And they say there'll be a period of time, and I don't know how long. I don't know whether this event happens over years or what, but there'll be a period of time to where we have almost no free will externally. All external events are completely predestination. There was that Project Looking Glass a number of years ago, which I found after the angels had told me this, about that some event happened in the future that no matter what the elites did with the Project Looking Glass looking into the future, they couldn't beat it. And it was like it came to this bottleneck, this singular event, and then people threw off the shackles of the most evil people. So the Malachians getting trounced, basically. And this guy doesn't identify a date, I don't think, but if you look it up, you can find on YouTube, like the Project Looking Glass, they saw an event, the elite saw an event or something like that. But the angels say that during that period of time, we'll have no external free will, but as always, we'll have total internal free will. And our reaction internally is going to set up how our lives are on the other end of this bottleneck, and or our next reincarnation, if perhaps we don't make it through such an event. And that, therefore, the best thing we can do right now is to really work on our healing, to really work on healing our trauma, on integrating our shadow and figuring out the ways that we're missing the mark as human beings, and the way that we can be better to one another and in greater harmony. So that's what I would tell people, is that I actually think the future is going to be amazing,
Right. Well, and it sounds like what you're describing is the end of the Kali Yuga cycle, and the elites can't defy the cycles of time no matter what they do. Even if they could time travel to the future, they realize that there's nothing they can do. And I love that creates immense hope in me, and I hope it does in the audience. And that's exactly what I was hoping you would share with us. Ian, you are a tremendously bright light, a white light.
Thank you, brother.
Some would say a white lotus of light. And I love having you on the show. I think you crushed it last time. You crushed it this time. Yeah, and obviously people know I help Sam find guests for his shows, and you do an excellent job with that show as well.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, it's really cool to know you and to talk about all this stuff. So look forward to an email from me to have you back on the show again soon to get into all this.
I love that.
And yeah, I mean, thank you so much, folks. Please go to YouTube, follow White Lotus of Light, and go to whitelotusoflight.com for more info about Ian and how you can get in touch with him, how you can sign up for the courses we discussed. Anything else you want to promote or plug before we wrap up here?
Yeah, just I'm not going to be, I've said this before, but I am, in the next few months, I'm going to transition to working for this awesome corporation that's doing, I think, really amazing work that really will help liberty and actually, I think, have a really profoundly positive impact on the planet. And so when I switch into that, I'm going to stop doing astrology readings. I'm going to continue because it's very important. So the angels want me to do angelic magic, and especially to find people who are able to do the higher order magic. That's really important. They're like, the time is now. It really needs to spread. And so I'm going to continue to do that, but I'm going to basically stop doing astrology for people publicly. I'm not sure exactly when. I had thought I was going to start in like July or something like that. And I started to wind up my business. And then unfortunately, the CEO and founder had a terrible health crisis, and that kind of derailed things. And it's taking a little bit longer to get some of the financial stuff in place, in part because of that. And so the good news is that I am doing charts for the next couple of months, probably through at least through October and maybe into November. And so I do a lot of different things, and maybe my angelic magic thing is like my thing that I operate at the highest level, but I'm a really excellent Jyotishi or Vedic astrologer. And so learning about, near-term karmas and how they're going to unfold can be really helpful. And if you're just turned 40 or on the cusp of turning 40, that Navamsa chart can really give you a shot in the arm in terms of hope. And I also teach people how to hack their charts and be able to lean into the positive indication of the so-called negative houses, negative planets. And it's as though you have like 10,000 volts of electricity that need to come through you. And like I have a very charged 8th house. And so I experienced that when I was younger in an unconscious way of loss and betrayal and death. And then I started to lean into it, become an astrologer, do all the things I do now. And now I experience as that higher octave of the 8th house, astrology, angelic magic, Reiki, all these kind of like more positive things. And so that energy comes through me, and I no longer experience it as loss and debt and death. And so if you have a really powerful 6th, 8th, or 12th house, or it's afflicted or whatever, you can lean into the positive indications of those things. And it's a way to like, you can have a complete boomerang in your life by leaning into the positive indications of your chart. And so that can be really powerful. And I also do, last plug, I also do spiritual guidance. And one of the main things I focus on with people is helping them with trauma. I'm recovering from, in the process of healing from, complex PTSD. I had extreme trauma when I was younger, and I have been able to heal that to a huge degree. And that's something that I can teach people how to do. And it's such a powerful thing. You'll be astonished how much you're able to accomplish when trauma isn't just constantly sapping you. And there's some people who are probably like beyond my skill, and there's people I know who can help those folks. But especially if people have like more moderate to light trauma, that's stuff that I can definitely help people with. If it's super severe, like I've had mixed success with it. It's a long road, but that's something that I also help people with, or just giving spiritual guidance in general. People who are questioning, what's next for me in this lifetime? What do I need to do? And so often people already know the answers. It's just, I'm a big believer in helping people reclaim their own power and their own understanding of who and what they already are. People already know. They usually just, for some reason, have some kind of like fear or need for permission to really go in the direction of their passions in life, and to figure out how to do it in a way that they can make a living, So, yeah, that's what I'd say. And thank you so much, Mark, for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, thank you. The pleasure is mine. And of course, folks, follow up with Ian, especially if you feel called to any of his services that he offers, and immerse yourself in the moment wherever you are in the now.